Hello everyone and welcome to another video on the channel. I'm your host Seiji McSwain. Now for today's video I'm going to be reacting to some of my record predictions that I have here. I wrote most of them down and wrote like what I thought about the season and why I thought they would go, this record. And some of them were pretty interesting. Some of them I got spot on. I'm really going to be going over the ones that were 3 win differences, 3 loss differences, and also ones I got perfectly spot on. Other ones, they're like close, 1 to 2 games close, nothing really too much of a difference. So I thought I'd just do the ones that are more drastic of a difference than from what I thought from before the season started and what I think now after the season has ended. Okay, so with the first team, we have the Arizona Cardinals. Now, for my record prediction, I had them going 9-8, and their real record ended up being 4-13. So obviously, one of the more drastic examples of a big change. And mainly from what I saw here, I made it, a key point saying that they did take several steps back in the offseason, especially with DeAndre Hopkins being suspended for the 6 games that he was, and then Christian Kirk also leaving the team to go to the Jaguars and having some success there with the Jaguars as well. And I was really unsure about the early start for the Cardinals from that 6-game stretch, and I believe DeAndre Hopkins came back during that Saints game in which they did win by 8, but in that first 6-game stretch, they lost to the Chiefs, they beat the Raiders, they lost to the Rams, they beat the Panthers, they lost to the Eagles, and they lost to the Seahawks. So they ended up 2-4, which I did put here. I said they might finish with the 2-4, 3-3 record, depending, on DeAndre Hopkins' suspension. And I said it's hard to be successful in a very stacked NFC West, and you're gonna have a hard time really trying to beat or get on top, and did not come up perfect for them. I mean, they were hit with some injury bugs, obviously. Big hits to Kyler Murray during the season were definitely tough for them to have, and they ended up the season with 4-13 record, and definitely not the season I expected out of the Cardinals, especially with them coming out. I think last season they had an undefeated 6-0 record, I want to say. First year with JJ Watt there. It was pretty interesting. They started out 6-0, and they kind of fell flat later in the season, and they were first round exits in the playoffs, in which they lost to the Rams, and then they came back this season. Maybe, I was like, I gave them 9-8 because I felt that, okay, even if you start with a 2-4 or 3-3 record, you still have DeAndre Hopkins, you still have Kyler Murray, you have the trade for Marquise Brown. It kind of works out. You could still you still have JJ Watt. Sure, you don't have Chandler Jones, who went to the Raiders. I mean, they took a lot of hits in the offseason, but I still felt like they could do something. But I felt like that residual kind of fall off at the end of the 2021 to 2022 season kind of went again and, fell into the 2022-23 season. So, just with the Kyler Murray and front office issues, and now at the end of the season, a lot has changed. Even now, they're possibly trading DeAndre Hopkins. JJ Watt has retired, and Cliff Kingsbury isn't their coach anymore. They're still in the coaching hunt, possibly for Sean Payton, but nobody really knows. I feel like the state of the Cardinals is kind of in limbo as of right now, and as of right now, it's just not looking too good for them. But we'll have to see what they do by the end of this offseason, by the time I give my record predictions for next year. Okay, so for the next team, I have the Chicago Bears going 4-13 in my prediction. In reality, they got they were 3-14. So I know I wouldn't really talk about ones that I didn't get spot on, but the one thing that I did get spot on about the Bears is that they would be the worst team in the league and that they would have the first pick. So I knew without a doubt that they would have the first pick. And I was like, yeah, they don't look good. They haven't really played, Justin Fields hasn't really had the talent around him to really succeed. And I just didn't feel confident about the Bears, future, or at least for this season. I didn't really feel that they had a good, setup for Justin Fields. Justin Fields did particularly well compared to his rookie season, but I wouldn't say it's anything too special. He was still having some issues trying to protect himself in the pocket and also trying to get it deep to other players. So really overall just a lack of help. I kind of already predicted that, and that's what happened. Okay, so now for the next record prediction, I said that the Cleveland Browns would go 10-7. Now really I was thinking what's going to be happening with Deshaun Watson. It was kind of hard to really come out with a prediction because I didn't really know what would be happening exactly. It was interesting. It looked pretty up in the air for the Browns. At least I felt that they had a decent team. They got Amari Cooper in the offseason. They got Jacoby Brissett. They still have Nick Chubb, Donovan Peoples-Jones. They lost Jarvis Landry. They lost OBJ last season. So, and then they also traded away Baker Mayfield. Things felt kind of in limbo, but I felt that the Browns still had a chance to have a winning record once Deshaun Watson came back. Now, Deshaun Watson didn't really have the best season. He came in played 6 games. He had 99 completions on 170 attempts with a 58.2 completion percentage and 1,102 yards, averaging 6.5 yards per pass and having 183.7 yards per game, 7 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. It was pretty drastic in that 6-game stretch. Jacoby Brissett did play 10 games more than him, and obviously had better stats, completion-wise, yards, yards per or average yards per pass. He actually had less yards per game though. Jacoby Brissett only having 163 to Deshaun Watson's 183.7. But obviously, Jacoby Brissett would have more touchdowns, more interceptions, but not the best performance coming late into the season by Deshaun Watson. So, that was really lacking. They definitely could have had a winning record once he came back. But it didn't look good for the Browns. And then I also did bring up a stretch in the season, spanning from week 5 to week 8, which they played the Chargers, the Patriots, Ravens, and Bengals, and Dolphins. Sorry. I thought it would be 4 losses before their bye week, and it wasn't really. They lost to the Chargers by 2, and they absolutely got destroyed by the Patriots, who were starting Bailey Zappi at that time. Then they lost to the Ravens by 3, and then they destroyed the Bengals. At this time, the Bengals weren't playing with Jamar Chase since he was injured, and then they get destroyed by the Dolphins. And then it wasn't really looking too good for them. Overall, it wasn't looking good. It was not looking good for them in that stretch, at least. And then they also lost to the Bills by 8. So, and also the Buccaneers. They lost to the Buccaneers they beat the Buccaneers by 6. Sorry. They beat the Buccaneers by 6, and I felt like a 9-10 win would be best for them, but clearly not. They just ended up with a 7-10 record. Just overall, just a lacking performance on both sides of the ball. Nothing much to really report on for the Browns. It's just Yeah, definitely not what I thought was going to happen with Deshaun Watson. Maybe he's just a little bit rusty and needs to get back into playing and practicing. So maybe something might change back into what it is now with a 10-7 record. Now that Deshaun Watson would have a full season practicing with the team, but I really don't know. I'm not sure what would really happen with the Browns. Okay, so next up we have the Denver Broncos. My prediction was a 10-7 record, and they're going to be tied at the bottom with the Raiders in the AFC West, and they ended up with a 5-12 record, and were last in the AFC West. And for this one, I really brought up in my prediction, the fact that Russell Wilson's, he was thought to be a great quarterback coming out of Seattle, and I still think he is. Maybe it might just be the coaching. Who knows? They're still looking for a coaching change now. So maybe something might happen there where, they use Russell Wilson a little bit better. I'm not sure. Or if it was just Russell Wilson. And mainly just his fault. But, well, I guess we'll never know until next season starts. The Broncos were 10-7, or my prediction was 10-7. They ended up 5-12. And I thought, the pass protection wasn't really going to help Russell Wilson. And Russell Wilson, he was sacked 55 times. This season. But yeah, he was sacked 55 times this season and had a 16-11 touchdown interception ratio. So obviously not the best. He did have 3,524 passing yards, which isn't too bad. But obviously not not the preferable stats that you want to see out of your starting quarterback. 292 completions on 483 attempts with a 60.5 completion percentage. Nothing good that you really want to see there. And then I also brought up Courtland Sutton, who I thought would be having a breakout season. But he didn't really have all that much. He kind of played second fiddle to Jerry Jeudy this season. He had 64 receptions on 109 targets. He had 829 yards, 2 touchdowns, and about 55.3 yards per game. But that's really about it. I thought he would have a better season. Jerry Jeudy, who was the leading receiver for them, had 67 targets on 67 receptions on 100 targets for 972 yards. And then 6 touchdowns and 64.8 yards per game. So, Courtland Sutton didn't really play up to my expectation. Still was playing second fiddle on the team receiving wise. And I also talked about the Denver Broncos pass rush. I didn't think they were really going to be able to do much and try and get to that quarterback. And they only had 36 sacks on the season. And I felt that it was going to be hard to really play in the AFC West if you don't have a defense. That's why I kind of put them up last. And it seemed like they got a little bit better once they traded Bradley Chubb away to the Dolphins. But still, the defense was pretty mediocre and not really doing all that much, in my opinion. So I had to go ahead and not the best, but my prediction was definitely far off. I mean, I still had them being last in the AFC West, or at least tied with the Raiders, but I didn't think it would be, this low for the Broncos, especially coming off of, an off season where Russell Wilson's joining the team. I mean, the team looked decent. I mean, they got rid of their quarterback problem, and they should have been fine, but clearly it just wasn't it. Maybe it was the coaching by Nathaniel Hackett, or maybe it was just a play by Russell Wilson. Okay, so next up, I have my Detroit Lions. Now, I had them, my prediction going 6-11. I'd say at that point, that was a pretty, that was a pretty modest prediction. I was like, or not modest. I'd say like a pretty good expectation for a Lions fan. That was pretty. That was our ceiling right there. 6-11. I was like, whoa, they're 6-11. That's a little high. I know. I'm getting my hopes up, especially after the 3-win season and going into a rebuilding year, another rebuild. This time going into our second year with Dan Campbell. He didn't really impress, but I still felt that the team really liked him. And a lot of the players really liked him, so I felt that maybe they can do a little bit better this season. I did say that the Lions would have one of the better offensive lines this season, and I believe that they were at least top 5 in sacks allowed, only allowing 23 sacks. And then they also allowed Jamal Williams to have 1,066 rushing yards. Added on to that, they also had a total of 2,179 rushing yards by the team. So, the offensive line played absolutely amazing. I also said that the defense would improve, but they didn't really. They were still the worst defense in the league, ranking number 32 in most categories for defensive stats. But they still did show improvement compared to last season. Amani Oruwariye definitely did kind of decrease in his statistical ability, or not statistical ability, but his stats weren't as good. He's holding a lot more. Just looked interesting. He came off one of the better seasons from a defensive back last, or from the 2021 to 22 season. Now going into the 2022-23 season, he doesn't really look that good. Jeff Okudah kind of had the season that I thought he would. Not much. Got injured a little bit. He had one good game against Justin Jefferson, locking him down for only 14 yards and 3 to 5 receptions. So, he had a great game there, but that was really about it that I heard from Jeff Okudah. But I think the Lions rookies here, their defensive rookies, probably were the one thing that benefited this defense. Aiden Hutchinson, he's up for Rookie of the Year this season, and he had 9.5 sacks, 3 interceptions. That's a pretty good, impressive defensive end stat just for his first season. So I'm excited to see what we see more of him. And then Justin Houston coming in only 7 games into the season. First game was playing in Thanksgiving against the Bills, and he splashed automatically onto the scene. He had 2 sacks on Josh Allen against one of the better offensive lines. I believe the Lions and the Bills at that time were tied first for least sacks allowed. So he had a great game against them. And then several games later, he had a sack in every single game that he played in. And then it broke, I believe, against the Panthers, but he was having a great season. I believe he ended up with 7 sacks on the season, and 2 forced fumbles. So a great season by Justin Houston. And then in the secondary, Kirby Joseph, first player, or not first player, but one of 3 players to have at least 3 or more interceptions on Aaron Rodgers in the same season, which is incredible. I think he played really great this season. Definitely the magnum opus of this defense, at least in the secondary. The DB room kind of looked like it was going down. Tracy Walker got injured at the safety position. Jeff Okudah, pretty mediocre. Amani Oruwariye, mediocre season as well. And just overall, just not the best play overall by any DB at all. So Kirby Joseph definitely giving us Lions fans some hope that this DB room can definitely improve. But overall, I think the Lions really improved here. I'm happy with their 9-8 season. I was thrilled. This was making the playoffs. Okay, the stretch that they had, they made it past. I wanted to say they would only have a 4-game. My bottom expectation was 4 wins. All I wanted was 4 wins, and I'll be happy, right? And then they passed 4 wins, then they passed 6 wins. And then that last game against the Packers, they really fought. They knocked the Packers out of the playoffs. They got a 9-8 record. That felt like it was making the playoffs. Even though they were so close to making the playoffs, they lost because then, the Rams lost in that Seahawks game. They were so close, but they still had a winning record. and this is the first winning record from the Lions since I want to say 2016. Like it's been almost 7 years since they had a winning record, and they ended up getting it. And I mean, I was just thrilled. It was basically like making the playoffs for the Lions. And my expectation for next season, I probably won't make it any higher because I don't want to get my hopes up. But I really want to, I really hope that they make the playoffs next season. Okay, so coming in with this one, I had the Green Bay Packers. Now, the Green Bay Packers, my prediction was for them going 12-5. And they ended up going 8-9. And this was definitely an interesting season. They kind of were falling at some points in the season, just didn't look too great. Yeah, like there were just some things that like were just not or very surprising from this Packers offense. And I said they were my clear favorites to win the NFC North, which ended up going to the Vikings. I had the Packers with the third best record in the league, and they just couldn't do it. I said that, that I knew that Aaron Rodgers wasn't going to have another MVP season, but I did say that there's a possibility that they could make the Super Bowl. But clearly, now with that 8-9 record, they didn't even make it to the playoffs. They got swept by the Lions. And let me see. I believe they swept the Packers. And they split the division matchups with the Vikings. So obviously not the best divisional season for the Packers. Getting swept by the Lions, splitting with the Vikings. Not really what you want out of this team. I felt like they could have done better. And now it kind of goes back into that whole cycle now. Is Aaron Rodgers going to retire? Is he going to go back with the Packers? Is he going to get traded? Nobody really knows. Again, as a Lions fan, I just want him to leave at this point. Just leave. Okay. We don't need you here in the NFC North. You've already proven everything. Your team's falling down. Just let them fall down. Just leave and have the Lions, end up winning the NFC North. So, I'm fed up with the Packers now. So Aaron Rodgers can just leave. So I'm fine with that. But yeah, definitely we're just back into this kind of limbo. Is he coming back? Is he not? But the Packers just didn't have a great season overall. I felt chemistry was off. This is definitely one of the younger wide receiver cores that he's been working with in his tenure there. Also, the loss of Devontae Adams, of course, is definitely going to be a big loss to them. And it definitely showed out on the offensive side of the ball. And I felt like the team statistically didn't have the best season. Aaron Rodgers still passed for almost 4,000 yards, and then Aaron Jones ran for a little over 1,000 yards. So, really, it looked great, but I think it was too little too late, in my opinion. I felt like they started making that comeback late in the season, and they almost made the playoffs, but I felt like they did too much too late in the season. And it just didn't really work out timing-wise and with the opponents that they had to face in the season. Okay, so coming into this one, we have the Colts. Now, the Colts, I predicted them to have a 10-7 record, and then in reality, they had a 4-12 record. So definitely a big fall off. And at the beginning of the season here, I felt that the quarterback position was definitely a little out there. Nobody really knew who was going to be starting for them. So during the season, they definitely made that trade for Matt Ryan. That was a big trade that they needed to have, but didn't really work out. And I thought JT would have a good season, but the injury bug kind of hit him. Definitely didn't have the season that a lot of people would expect. The offensive line played pretty abysmal. Looking at here, the Matt Ryan, or actually no, not Matt Ryan, but they played a total of 3 quarterbacks over the course of the season, but the offensive line allowed 60 sacks and only 1,866 rushing yards by the team. So really just not the best. They traded away Nyheim Hines during the season for Zach Moss with the Bills. And I mean, I felt that they would have a well-rounded young roster. Michael Pittman had a breakout season, but looking back on my prediction, I thought that the AFC South would come down to the Titans and Colts, but it ended up going down to the Titans and Jaguars. And I felt that the Colts could have had the AFC Championship there at the beginning of the season, but clearly now at the end, kind of just looking back at the season, wasn't really great. I mean, if you have to play all three of your quarterbacks over the course of the season, that is not a good sign. So, I mean, unless you're the 49ers, of course, but if you're the Colts, that just was not a good sign. Losing Jonathan Taylor wasn't a good sign. Not having a good backup running back wasn't a good sign. I mean, just overall, not a great season by the Colts, and that's why they ended up only having 5 wins. Okay, and now next up we have the Jacksonville Jaguars, who, in my prediction, I said would go 6-11, but they ended up going 9-8 and winning the AFC South. And really, I just said that Trevor Lawrence is going to have more improvement now with a better coach, with Urban Meyer leaving. So I thought, he would have he would show more improvement. Doug Peterson, was already the better coach in my eyes, and he already had that Super Bowl experience. But I felt that it wasn't really enough. Like, adding Christian Kirk, you lost DJ Shark, but you gained Zay Jones, and you're getting Travis Etienne back. And that defense looked pretty good at the end of the season. I just felt that all those changes weren't really enough to have a winning record, or at least a 500 record. But ended up, they transcended that. I mean, they transcended the 500 record. They got 9-8. They won the AFC South. They made it to the playoffs. They won in the wild card round. They ended up getting knocked out in the divisional round, but to the Chiefs. So, I mean, and they put up a fight. I mean, they only lost 27-20. So overall, I felt that they had a pretty good season. I think Trevor Lawrence definitely showed improvement from last year. This season, he had 52. Actually, no, sorry, that's the postseason. That's why I was like, why did they only pass for 505 yards? This season, he had 387 completions, 584 yards, or 584 attempts, 4,113 yards, 66.3% completion percentage, 7 yards per pass, 241.9 yards per game, 25 touchdowns to only 8 interceptions. I mean, and he was only sacked 27 times. It was great. Travis Etienne rushed for over 1,000 yards. Christian Kirk had over 1,108 yards receiving. So I mean, overall, it was great. Defense did their thing. Looking at it here, they had 35 sacks and 14 interceptions. So not the greatest stats, but they were doing pretty good. Foye Oluokun did his thing. Devin Lloyd, coming in as a rookie, did his thing. So I mean, overall, this defense and offense played really well. The Jaguars had a pretty well-rounded team in order to get to that 9-8 record, and definitely transcended what I thought, or my expectations were for them. Now, coming up next, I have the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I predicted the Kansas City Chiefs would be 11-6 and be second in the AFC West. They ended up being 14-3 and first in the AFC West, getting that first seed in the AFC. And right now, they're playing to go to the Super Bowl tomorrow against the Bengals. And it's gonna be interesting in that championship round. Looking at it here for the Chiefs, they look pretty good. I said that they would still be a playoff team even without Tyreek Hill, so I was right about that. But I definitely underestimated them. I did talk about that offensive line and how they would play, but they only gave up 26 sacks and allowed the running game to rush for almost 2,000 yards with 1,970 yards. Isaac Pacheco bursted onto the scene there. Jerick McKinnon doing his thing through the receiving game. and Patrick Mahomes. I mean, he was just doing Patrick Mahomes stuff. I was a little bit worried about the Kansas City secondary since they had just lost Tyrann Mathieu, but obviously not much of a loss there for them. Let me see here, as they had 11 interceptions on defense. I mean, overall, it looked pretty good, I would say. Nothing too out of hand on that defensive side of the ball. They do have to be careful here in the playoffs, though. There have been some possible defensive breakdowns for them. They in the loss against the Colts, there were some minor mistakes there that happened. The loss against the Bills, there were some things that happened there which weren't favorable, I guess, for them. And then also the game against the Bengals, they lost by 3. Definitely not the best defensive performance there. So let's see what they do in the playoffs. But definitely they did way better than what I thought they would without Tyreek Hill and Tyrann Mathieu. Now, for the next prediction, I said that the Las Vegas Raiders would be 10-7, but they actually ended up being a pretty bad team, and only ending up 6-11. And for my prediction, I was like, it kind of feels wrong to put them here tied at last. I was like, I don't really know how I feel about it. But clearly I was right. I mean, they were going to be bottom tier AFC West teams, but I didn't think they were going to be this bottom tier of an AFC West team. And I mean, I thought that this would be the season that Derek Carr can show everybody he's a pretty good quarterback, but kind of showed the opposite of that. Showed why he's not the best quarterback, and it looks like the Raiders are moving on from him after this season. Now, again, offensive line kind of brings up a concern. I mean, I thought that they were going to do a lot since, trading for Devontae Adams, but, it just wasn't enough. I mean, the offensive line was very concerning for me. They didn't do anything with it, and definitely showed. I mean, Josh Jacobs had a great season after they declined his 4th-year option with the new coaching staff, so I'm sure that he's going to get a new deal. But, yeah, definitely not the best there. Our other 2 receivers, Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller, were both injured during the season for pretty prolonged amounts of time, so that wasn't really the best to happen to the offense. But overall, I kind of felt that the Raiders would have a tough time against the stacked AFC West, in which they did. And I did say that, even with a 10-7 record, they could still make the playoffs. But just because how stacked the AFC West is, I thought that the AFC West was going to be how the NFC East is this year, where like they had the Eagles, Cowboys, and Giants all in the playoffs, and even the Commanders were in there for a little bit until they started losing down the stretch. But I thought the AFC West would be how the NFC East was, but it just didn't show up like that, and the Raiders ended up disappointing pretty heavily. And bringing up a disappointing season, we have the Los Angeles Rams. I had them predicted at 13-4 record, with the 2nd best record in the league, and they ended up going 5-12. Not the best performance there. I mean, I kind of brought up, questioned, their replacements that they had. They weren't really able to bring back OBJ. Nobody really knows what's going to happen with him. But yeah, the Rams just really couldn't do much. The defense, I was like, they're going to be one of the best defenses. Was not. That was totally false. I said they were going to have excellent coaching. Maybe they would. Maybe they had good coaching. Maybe it's just this injury bug. I mean, they were 3-3. They lost Cooper Kupp, and then after they lost Cooper Kupp, they lost Matthew Stafford, and then after Matthew Stafford, they lost Aaron Donald. I mean, they lost their 3 big hitters on this team, and you can't really expect them to do much after they've lost so many players that are basically a necessity and why they were so good last season. And I thought they were going to be able to beat out the 49ers and the Cardinals for that top NFC West spot, but they weren't. The Rams just could not beat the 49ers. That was basically their kryptonite. and they split the division with the Cardinals. But really, overall, just that I feel like the injury bug mainly was a big thing that happened for the Rams. So maybe next season they come back a little bit better. But Aaron Donald's future with the team is up in the air. Sean McVay said that he's coming back. And who knows about if Matthew Stafford's even going to be able to play again. I mean, it was a back injury. It looked pretty bad, or sounded pretty bad from what I've been hearing. So who knows if he's going to be coming back to play. And just overall, it's kind of in shambles for the Rams right now, but we'll have to see if they can pick it up by the end of the offseason. So for the Vikings, I had them predicted at a 10-7 record, but they did end up going 13-4 and winning the NFC North. And mainly what I was talking about was that I thought the Vikings, they had a more experienced coaching staff. They switched out the head coaching spots, and really it looked pretty good, like a really good move. And overall just looked great. I mean, it was a source of optimism for the fans. But I saw Minnesota as a wild card contender, but I didn't think they'd be anything more than that, and that's what they were. They made it to the wild card round, and it ended up getting knocked out in the first round by the New York Giants. And one big thing that I did bring up is that fans should be, even though there were a lot more highs than lows for the fan base, a lot of people should be thinking what comes after Cousins for the Vikings, because clearly I feel like Cousins just isn't the answer for this offense, and I don't think that they're going to be running with him in the long run or in the next few years. So a lot of people should be asking themselves, what they do once they kind of take Kirk Cousins off the board, and what they can do at that quarterback position. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see what the Vikings do after this season. But I say my prediction was fairly correct. I mean, other than the record, I mean, obviously I didn't think that they were going to be this good, but they kind of showed out to be frauds and didn't do too well in the playoffs, which I got right. So definitely still brings into question what happens after Kirk Cousins. I don't really see many people talking about it, but I feel like Kirk Cousins is definitely going to be a source of worry for the Vikings coming into next season. Now, next up, I have the New Orleans Saints, who I predicted would be 7-10, and they ended up being 7-10 in a three-way tie for the bottom of the NFC South. But the Saints, the main reason why I said the Saints would be 7-10 is that I felt that they could win 9 games, but Jameis Winston looks like he's in better shape, but ended up getting injured during the season and then lost his job to Andy Dalton over the course of the season. And then also brought up the 9-game suspension that Alvin Kamara would have after the Pro Bowl incident that happened. So he's going to be facing that suspension, so that was definitely a big hit for them. And then I also brought up the question marks around Michael Thomas's injury. He was out for a little bit earlier in the season, came back, and didn't really show out, and then was injured once again. Looking at it here, I mean, he falls down pretty low on the list. He only played 3 games. Michael Thomas only played 3 games and had 16 receptions. So Michael Thomas still question mark. A lot of people are bringing up the fact that he might not even be with the Saints by the time this upcoming season starts. And there's a lot of question marks around that quarterback position. Is Jameis Winston going to come back? And, is he going to be a starter? Or is Andy Dalton going to be the starter again? Who, didn't really play that well. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do here. But it was pretty interesting that I did get the Saints record prediction correct. Now, next up, I have the New York Giants, who went my prediction was that they would go 6-11, but then end up getting a 9-7 record. I was kind of worried about Daniel Jones going into this season, but he kind of did what I thought he would do. Didn't do all that much, but still looks great on paper, so it looks like they're probably going to be keeping him. And yeah, like mainly my main worry about the Giants was just the quarterback position. I felt Daniel Jones isn't really the best quarterback for the team, but again, people are blinded by stats. okay, stats, they're blinded by stats, but they're not watching the games. I'm watching the games, and he's not looking all that great. People are like, oh, he's a great quarterback. Look at this pass that he threw. Look at this stat where he has 15 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions. Like, oh wow, this is such a great stat line for a quarterback. But do you see him play? Okay, do you see him play? 317 completions on 472 attempts. That's pretty good. But do you see the passes that he's making? Dump offs. Very rarely anything very far down the field. So in my opinion, Daniel Jones is not their franchise quarterback, but it looks like stats wise they're going to be making him that. And I think the main man who has tricked the entire media into thinking Daniel Jones is a good quarterback is their coach, Brian Daboll. Brian Daboll is just the coach of the year. Okay, my mid-season predictions, I said that Nick Sirianni was going to be coach of the year. Because at that point they were pretty good, and they were winning a lot of games. But Brian Daboll has basically just made the same Giants team, right? That wasn't any good last season, had a top 5 pick, into one of the best. Not one of the best teams, but made it into a playoff team, in which they did make it to the divisional rounds. Like, that's pretty good in my opinion as a coach, to be able to, like, nothing too splashy. I mean, Kayvon Thibodeau maybe you could probably say is their biggest addition, but nothing that just would add a lot to the team. Like, I didn't really see that much. So I mean, they added some pieces, but not anything big. And Brian Daboll was just able to make this team go into the playoffs. So I think he deserved Coach of the Year, and I think that's really the main reason why the Giants were able to kind of, exceed my expectations. Now, next up, I have the Eagles here. Now, the Eagles, in my prediction, would go 11-6 and still win the NFC East, but they ended up going 14-3 and still winning the NFC East. Now, really, I was like, I think they're gonna win AFC East. I thought Jalen Hurts was gonna be a little bit better, but I still brought up his kind of downsides. I mean, his hesitation, his accuracy, the decision making under pressure wasn't really all the best, but he definitely improved over the course of this season, and definitely showed out. I said that they had the greatest roster in the division in the NFC East, and they had a little bit of an advantage over the Dallas Cowboys, in which they did, I believe. So in my opinion, I thought the Eagles still have a great season, but I didn't think it'd be this great. I mean, they went 8-0 until they lost to the Commanders. So I mean, the Eagles have been showing out. They're gonna play on Sunday or tomorrow against the 49ers for the Super Bowl. So I have the Eagles winning that one, but I really hope that the Eagles can do something here. But definitely an interesting thing that I thought the Eagles still win the AFC East, or NFC, sorry, and make it pretty far in the playoffs. So definitely interesting. But great prediction on my part. Now, going into the last prediction that I had the Buccaneers going 12-5, and they ended up going 8-9. I mean, they still won the NFC South, but definitely not the best season that you were gonna see from Tom Brady, but also just from the team entirely. They just didn't really play that well. And looking at I mainly brought up one stretch here, if I can find it here. I brought up one stretch that they had, and I thought it was going to be in their first 4-game stretch. They had two, or from the looks of it, they had two pretty difficult games to start off the season. They had one against the Cowboys. I thought that would be tough, but they ended up winning 19-3. And then they had the one against the Saints. They ended up winning 20-10. They lost the one against the Packers 14-12, and then they lost to the Chiefs by 10, 41-31. So I thought it would be tough, but I said that they were able to get those 2 games to start off the season right. They should have a pretty good position to have regular season success, or at least even the same that they did in 2021. But clearly they didn't. They still won the NFC South, and they still made the playoffs, but they were knocked out in the wild card round to the Cowboys, and then also they just didn't play that well. They just were able to win the division due to a mediocre competition in the NFC South with the Carolina Panthers, New Orleans Saints, and Atlanta Falcons all ending with a 7-10 record to the Buccaneers 8-9. So really overall, not the best season, but they were still able to have a little bit of success, just not as much as I thought they would. And that'll be all for today's video. Thank you for watching all the way through. Make sure you go ahead and leave a comment, like, and subscribe. We just hit 60 subscribers on the channel, so I do want to thank you guys for that. And that'll be all. Make sure you go ahead and share the video as well to anybody that you think may be interested. But again, thank you for watching all the way through, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.